you're in the 17th district. Where is that in the scheme of things? I think that's like North Austin a bit.
It is. It's the far north end of Travis County, like Wells Branch, Pflugerville, out that way. Pretty much north of Palmer, and then goes out to Waco. It goes out to College Station and Bryan, and there's like about 9 rural counties in between. So it's a heavily gerrymandered district to neutralize a bunch of Austin Democrats, I think.
You got that right, man. Are they going? I guess they'll hopefully rewrite those lines after this census, right?
Well, if the census ever gets finished and the figures are put in, then the legislature will redraw the districts. And Texas is supposed to get 3 more districts, so there'll be all kinds of state legislators like trying to jump over each other, trying to have their own congressional district probably when they're drawing those.
Yeah, and about the census, there was this push from President Trump about including the words about or asking if they're a legal citizen of the U.S. Is that something that you oppose or for?
I don't see any reason for that. The only thing that the census is supposed to ask is how many people live here. That's the only, in the Constitution, that's the only question that needs to be answered, because it's only used for redistricting purposes, like how many congressmen will a state have, and then within the states, like how will they redistrict the districts. They don't need to know all this other information about people that they ask anyway, and certainly they don't need to know whether someone's a citizen or not.
Do they need to? Well, shouldn't we know if there's illegal immigrants? I mean, they're not citizens after all. So should we redraw and make more government based on the more people that come here illegally?
Well, it's not really more government. You're going to have the same number of congressmen, no matter
Okay,
no
we're
matter
not
how
adding
many
more.
immigrants are
Okay,
here. Yeah,
okay.
just
I
a
was
matter
thinking
just a
that's
matter how they're distributed.
yeah. I was thinking that's how it works. If you get more districts, you get more congressmen.
Well, right. So Texas would have more, and say New York or Pennsylvania or one of those states would have less because they're losing population.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. You're running for Congress. Let's see. Bill Flores is the incumbent. He's not seeking re-election. He's a Republican. So you're running against Rick Kennedy, who's a Democrat, and Pete Sessions. That's not related to Jeff, is it?
No, not at all. I've rarely heard that name, but here there are those 2 famous Republicans there. Pete Sessions, though, the one who is my opponent, is the son of William Sessions, who was an FBI director back in the 90s.
Okay.
And but Pete was a congressman for 22 years from a Dallas district, and then he was defeated for re-election in 2018, and he went district shopping to try to find a new district to run in, and he picked the 17th, where he grew up in Waco. So he hadn't lived there for a long time, but he decided that he would run for Congress in that district, and he beat like 10 other Republicans in the primary. They seemed to want him. I don't know why, and they've nominated him. But he is a complete swamp monster. He is part of the establishment. He was chairman of the House Rules Committee, which is the committee that, in other words, for the 6 years he had that job, any legislation that went through Congress, it had to be something he favored. And he, in order to get out of that committee and go to the floor of the Congress, and he personally, single-handedly stopped any kind of marijuana reform legislation, for example, from going to the floor of Congress. It was him personally, because there were a lot of Republicans even that were in favor of that, but he said, nope, not going to happen. And pretty much he's a neocon, interventionist, war machine kind of guy, military industrial complex. And, obviously he claims to be conservative and fiscally conservative, but if his party leaders told him to vote for major government spending, he would certainly do it. And he certainly has in the past. So he's certainly not really not good for the district. We need someone who really believes in freedom, personal freedom and economic freedom.
I think you're absolutely right. And since you did mention marijuana there for a second, you're definitely pro marijuana, against the prohibition of cannabis. That's an easy one though, right? Everyone's into that one these days.
Oh yeah.
Well, what about LSD, ecstasy, mushrooms, hippie crack, Molly, PCP, fentanyl? You know, all the fun ones there. Are you for getting rid of those laws to prohibit those?
Yes, the war on drugs is a war on the American people. I've been against the drug war for over 40 years that I've been active in the Libertarian Party, And it was a really lonely position back in like the 80s and 90s, you know, the just say no era. That's the one that if a libertarian candidate says, "Oh, I'm against the war on drugs," and then explains why, everybody looked at you like you're nuts. But then libertarians were the ones that were behind the medical marijuana movement and got that going in California. And then it started slipping away from the drug warriors. Marijuana is the main way of, because it is a medicine, really. And it was true that marijuana had medicinal properties, but no one wanted to admit it. And they still don't want to admit it in a lot of circles who are so conservative that they think, oh, somewhere, sometime, someone's going to be smoking that for fun. They just can't allow that to happen. And so the public's really come around to the libertarian position on that. And now, surprisingly enough, in some communities, there are proposals on the ballot to legalize mushrooms or LSD and these kind of things. I think, wow, where did this ever come from? You know, it's libertarians have been calling for this sort of thing for years, and it's not because we specifically advocate people using drugs. I mean, I personally don't advocate that, but adults have the right to put anything in their bodies that they want. It's not up for the government to decide. It's for the individual to decide.
I 100% agree. Government should be not involved in my life, in many aspects of my life, which it is involved. But as for drugs, in 2018, more than 31,000 deaths involving synthetic opioids, other than methadone, occurred in the United States, which is more deaths than any other type of opioid. Synthetic opioid-involved death raised the rates increased by 10% from 2017 to 2018 and accounted for 67% of opioid-involved deaths in 2018. Will legalizing these opioids reduce the abuse and, most importantly, lower the death rate?
Well, part of the problem is that if you can't get the drug legally and you get it illegally, you're not going to have marked doses. You're not going to have quality control. You're not going to have anything that you would get if if the drugs are prepared and manufactured by a legitimate drug manufacturer. And so that's part of the problem. And the fact that people start using the opioids for pain, and now there's this war on pain medication where the doctors are told, oh, we're going to investigate you and take away your medical license if you prescribe too many of these drugs. So they tell their patients, well, sorry, you know, you can't get the pain medication you need for your back injury or whatever it is. And so then people have to go for illegal methods of getting the same drugs. And that's where the danger comes in. And then the drugs get cut with dangerous substances, fentanyl, for example. That might have been what you were referring to, because that's such a dangerous substance. There'd be no reason for anyone to take that if they could get, a pure, normal prescription type drugs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for abolition of all those laws against drugs. You know, the war on drugs is a war that will never ever win in America, and I think it's designed that way. You know, I think what was it? Nixon put that in place, and we haven't been able to get out of it at all.
No, and it was completely cynical. It's even been revealed one of his aides at that time, John Ehrlichman, who was part of the Watergate contingency there, he revealed in his memoirs that Nixon was trying to get, he didn't like black activists back then, and he didn't like anti-war activists, and he wanted to find a good way of getting at them. And he figured that making their favorite recreation illegal and harass them would be the best way to do it. So he announced the war on drugs. He figured that they'd be able to go after hippies and all these malcontents that they say that would be using all these drugs, and just accuse them of being criminals and take them off the street. And it's just compounded on itself when the war on drugs got into full gear, and these very strict drug laws with mandatory minimum sentences, and just increased our prison population and totally wrecked urban communities throughout the country, and turned the streets of cities into war zones and everything. It was a disaster. And we have so many people in prison, mostly for these drug offenses. The prison population's gone up, like 6 or 7 times or 8 times since 1980. And I believe it's 42% of all federal prisoners are there for nonviolent drug offenses.
42%?
Right, about 17% in the states and 42% in federal.
Yeah, man, it's such a bummer. You know, when I first moved to Texas, I was detained in El Paso. I had my whole my truck was full of all my stuff moving to Texas. And, I come from California where it was legal, at least medicinally at the time. and I had some paraphernalia. I had a couple of my old pipes. I didn't have much weed on me, maybe less than a gram. They pull me over, or at least got stopped at the border there of El Paso, and the dogs
Mm-hmm.
sniffed me out, and they gave me
Mm.
such a goddamn hard time out there. They handcuffed me to a bench. They've
Mm.
got their cops looking through me through my truck, and they were telling me, you better tell me everything. If the dog smells a thing in your tires, we're slashing those tires. You know, trying to scare the shit out of me, really, man. And I have not. And I was like, I was handcuffed to this bench. I said, officers, you know, is the handcuffs really this necessary? I'm not going anywhere. You know, you got my stuff. I'm really not going anywhere. Are they necessary? Yes, they're absolutely necessary. Detained me for 8 hours and gave me a ticket.
Terrible,
Took all
terrible.
my
See,
shit too. That was the worst part.
you know, these guys, they start on a power trip. They figure they can, they figure you look like you're a suspicious character, or they just have nothing else to do. They just figure, why not go after this bearded guy from California? Who better to go after and have a good time?
Oh, it was
And
even worse. I had a big old mustache too, and my name's Carlos. So they looked at the big mustache. They're like,
uh,
okay, we got to bust this guy right here.
or do they check your immigration status too, for that matter?
No, luckily I had a good old fashioned
Yeah.
ID from California. That's right. Are you from California as well?
I did live in California for quite a while. Yes.
You helped get the marijuana stuff going out there, right? At
Well,
least.
I wasn't behind that, but I was a strong supporter of it way back in '96 when it got when it was on the ballot, and everyone was shocked in the country when it passed. But that was the start of everything. That was the start of the reform of marijuana laws.
Now I'm not a big smoker these days. I still do partake at times, but it's funny. The second I left, I'm about 10 years into Austin here. The second
Mhm.
I left, I think it was a year or two, fully legal out there, and I was like, "What the hell, boys? What's going on?" But you
Well,
know,
one
Texas
problem
has
has
been
been,
a lot better for me. I believe it's definitely
yeah.
more. There's more personal freedom, just in general. And now that I'm seeing things happening, I mean, I'm only watching them on the news, of course, and the news only shows me what they want to show me. But
Mhm.
California is sort of a hellhole at the moment, for lack of better words. There.
Yeah, exactly. I'm more glad all the time that I left there, because it just keeps getting worse and worse. My daughter still lives there, and
Oh,
it's
I'm sorry.
yeah, the place is totally locked down. It seems they have like insane policies from the Democrats run the state about more than 2/3 veto-proof margin. They can just do whatever they want with taxes, spending, regulation. They just are running roughshod over everybody's rights out there. And that this bill they had, AB 5, that was to pretty much limit the gig economy. They don't want anybody earning freelance income, like you know, Uber and Lyft drivers, like strippers, like people just do freelance work. Anybody that is not on the payroll, and the unions don't like that, so that they're ruining California on that. They were wrecking the economy there even before the pandemic. And it's just so
But
Texas, you're right, is so much better.
but
Usually,
Ted, they've got
few
weed though. They
examples.
got legal weed though, man. They
Yeah,
got
they do.
legal weed.
I know. That's on the positive side, but yet they regulate it and tax it too much, so the black market's coming back.
Oh, is
And
that
so,
right?
yeah,
That is too funny. I went out there 2 years ago, and I was just able to go right into a shop, and you know they were able to service me, which was kind of cool. And it was really something amazing at the time for me. I was like, oh my god, you know, we're finally here, everybody. We're finally here. You know,
yeah,
marijuana
exactly.
is legal in 11 states, and it's legal for medicinal use in 33. When are we gonna have legal weed here in Texas, Ted?
Well, it's up to the legislature, but just like how my opponent Pete Sessions was making sure Congress never passed that kind of legislation, here in Texas, it's Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick that is solely and individually responsible for no reforms. He just will not let the bills come up in the state Senate, even after they pass. One of them passed, I think, almost unanimously in the state House last year in the legislative session, and he won't let it. He won't let anything up. He just is so totally opposed to that.
What's up with these Republicans and not being for at least herbs? I mean, if beer is able to, or alcohol is able to be legal, why not marijuana? It is simply
I
not
know.
as bad as being drunk is.
No, but see, they all get drunk probably. They want their drug of choice to be legal, and not the drug of choice of these more countercultural, people that they don't approve of their lifestyles, unfortunately.
Well, I tell you, they'll pick up a lot of votes if they just say we're for
Yeah.
it. You know, libertarians
Yeah.
are like right there hanging on. I mean, although I feel like most libertarians will vote towards the right on many issues, um, I'm sure we can pick up tons of libertarians in the Republican Party. I mean, we're not picking them up in the Republican Party. We will definitely vote for them though in a lot of
Right. Well,
policies.
you'd be surprised. Like Republicans seem to think that libertarians take votes away from Republican candidates, but polls and statistics have shown it's about a third, a third, and a third.
Oh, get out.
People, if a libertarian isn't running, they'd probably vote a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third wouldn't vote at all in that race if there was no libertarian running. So, because we're all across the political spectrum. Because for example, there's that I side with poll where you list your positions and see where you compare to your candidate.
Uh-huh.
And so in my own district, of course, I agree with myself. Only 93%, surprisingly. I don't know about the rest of it, but I agreed with my Democratic opponent, 54%, Rick Kennedy, and Pete Sessions, 46%. And that pretty much is the ideological breakdown, I would think. We have a
Yeah.
lot of liberal positions and a lot of conservative positions.
Yeah, I don't know why more people aren't for the Libertarian Party. I talked to some people and they're just like, get out of the road, man. If you're not willing to pick a side, you're gonna get run the hell over. I think
Well,
that's not cool.
no, not at all. And we're the only country pretty much that has only two parties, and it's like been 160 years of the exact same two parties, and it's a matter of the people just keep voting for the lesser of two evils. They say, oh, we're going to switch back and forth each time from the Democrats and Republicans. Oh, it's going to get better the next time. But if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, it's the definition of insanity. And that's
Yeah.
what's been going on in this country. And people really we need more voices in this country. We need libertarians, we need Greens, we need plenty of different political viewpoints expressed, and the limitations are so great. I mean, the Democrats and Republicans really don't allow a whole major range of debate. I mean, within the debate that goes on, it's pretty vigorous, as you know. No, people get pretty upset about their political views.
Yeah, that reminds me why because we usually use like Google Hangouts or one of the Google things, and Brandon was telling me you don't use any Google at all. Do you have a Gmail
Well, I
or
mean,
any?
one of my business emails is on there, but usually not. I mean, I've had like Hotmail for my email for like 20 years, the same email address, and it works just fine. So,
Well, I was thinking maybe because you're so libertarian, you're like, there's no way I'm letting Google track where the hell I am.
I still use their search engine, and
Okay. Yeah, so they know
yeah.
you. And another thing I was thinking too, you may be one of the libertarians that very few libertarian gentlemen that aren't rocking a mustache. I think maybe if you rocked a mustache, we get you some more votes there. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. I did have a beard and mustache like 25 years ago, but it's been a while.
Well, okay. So let's get into some more of your platform here. So, as for taxes, you want to vote to repeal income tax, abolish the IRS, and to never vote to raise taxes. Now, abolition of the IRS. How does that work exactly?
Well, basically, the personal income tax, for example, brings in about $1.7 trillion a year out of the federal budget, which is like over $4 trillion a year. So that's part of why there's a budget deficit. They're not collecting enough. And don't get me wrong, I don't want them to collect any more. But if you didn't have the amount that comes from the federal income tax, you'd still have the level of government that we had 15 years ago, and we sure had too much government back then. So we need to have massive cuts in federal spending to go along with the cuts in taxes. You can't just, in fact, this is what the Republicans do. In fact, they had a very good tax cut bill about 3 years ago. They cut all the taxes at the federal level, but they didn't cut any spending. So what do they expect is going to happen? The national debt just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so those things have to be combined with each other. And that's where libertarians, I think, differ from Republicans quite a bit when we start talking about tax policy, because we're not hesitant to cut spending, and the politicians who are in power just want to keep spending because they have a lot of people that are dependent on it, and those are the people that contribute to their campaigns, and they want to vote for them. So it's better to not be beholden to these special interest groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And last year we passed a proposition, Prop 4, that prohibits the imposition of an individual income tax. And I'm all for not paying that state income tax and ever having to
Right.
pay for it. Is there a world that we can not have to pay federal income tax?
Well, I sure hope so, because that's really, not only is it it costs people a lot of money, it's totally intrusive. I mean, you have to report all your income and all your expenses and all this, and the amount of compliance time is really expensive. And then if you make a mistake, you could go to jail. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's certainly no picnic to be involved with the federal income tax.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And I mean, it's possible, right? I mean, well, who's going to pay for all the stuff? Who's going to pay for the roads being paved, or the firemen, the policemen? Who's going to pay for that if there's no federal taxes?
Well, most of that actually is done at the state and local level, except the feds get involved because they want to get involved. So they give grants on those subjects. But the feds should not be involved in roads. They should not be involved in the police. They shouldn't be involved in firemen, and they usually aren't really. Uh, it's funny how the roads always come up. People say, "Oh, well, you have to have taxes for the roads," and then
You mean the
then you
ones that are
see
built?
a little film from like one of those old black and white films that shows like 1905, and someone's taking a movie camera through New York City back in the before the income tax was even adopted, and they say, well, look at that. There were actually roads back then before there was an income tax, and so there are plenty of ways of financing roads. You could have tolls, you could have businesses that are on those roads could pay for them because they're benefiting from the infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of different options on that. You don't have to just like tax people, and then when they say the gasoline taxes go for the roads, then they don't even maintain the roads with your gasoline taxes. So,
No, geez,
yeah.
there's some roads out here are terrible at times. Corpus Christi's got some terrible roads. I'm sorry, Corpus Christi, but I think maybe because they keep constantly get hit by the weather out there, so be tough there. I find, to be realistic, people probably are too sheep to try to even vote, or even somebody to propose a no federal income tax thing. But I mean, would you be more for like let's say that's off the table, would you be more for like a flat tax?
Well, the flat tax is an income tax. It's just how you calculate what people are supposed to pay. So, it'll be just a matter of we want to get rid of most of the government functions, except for aside from national defense and perhaps some courts and a few things like that. We really don't need that much federal government. I mean, the Constitution has a very limited role for the federal government and a lot more of a role for the state and local governments. But the feds have just gained more and more power over the years. And libertarians are the ones that want to turn that back, saying, no, you guys, we don't need you to do all this stuff. You're too big. You're too
Yeah.
intrusive. We just
Yeah,
don't need you.
it's crazy. Yeah, you're right. And sometimes I forget, because I live in such a liberal town, that I forget the fact that we don't need a 75% of the government that is here. How would property tax look if we didn't have so much government? Would we have these issues with gentrification? I mean, there's people, I mean, all the Teslas coming to town, so that's going to probably push out more people, what's going on with that? Would we be able to, is someone smoking pot back there? Is that what's going on?
Well, where they really want to raise taxes now locally with property taxes, whether it's at the schools or the cities or the counties or whatever, is because of the pandemic, where they're losing a lot of revenues. Like they're losing sales tax revenue because people aren't out there buying as much stuff, and then more people are unemployed, so they have more expenditures for unemployment reasons, and so because of the pandemic causing economic havoc, really. That's the obviously who's supposed to pay for that? Well, the poor taxpayer always gets put to. Uh, exactly, and so the legislature last year actually passed a law to limit how much they could raise taxes at the for the cities and the school boards and all that, and they have like an emergency provision in there saying, well, if there's an emergency, you might be able to do it more than that. So of course, whatever the maximum they're allowed to do, each of these agencies is trying to do the maximum and raise people's property tax. And frankly, there's going to be a property tax rebellion like there was in California 40 years ago with Prop 13. And people are just not going to stand for their homes keeping being reassessed, the taxes going up, and people losing their homes because they can't afford the taxes. So that's something that's got to change also here in Texas.
You're absolutely right. I mean, my girlfriend and I, we just bought a house and we wanted to buy something in Austin. Property taxes are just incredible out here. And we're forced to go all the way down to Kyle to get some proper property tax, a home that's big enough. As much as I love Austin, I mean, I think this is going to be, dude. We bought a house for what we can buy, a condo for out here or something, like a 1-bedroom condo. And it's crazy.
Well, one thing you could look for is unincorporated area. Then you lose having any city have property taxes. You just have the county, which you have anyway.
Oh, interesting. I remember there was a place back home in Anaheim that was incorporated, and I lived in that area. But I always heard it was unincorporated Austin or what? I mean Anaheim. But anyways, I stray from that. You did mention COVID earlier, and you have some things about COVID. But right now, I have to wear a mask at work. And, being more than 6 feet from anyone, working in my department there, I'm forced to do so because of the ordinance that's imposed in Austin that would fine our company $2,000 for every violation. And I'm in a workshop that isn't open to the public. And I'm forced to wear masks. Now, I mean, the CDC, I was looking for the study here, I could not find it, so please take this with a grain of sand. But, I mean, even the study said something to the effect that masks, although they do work in some instances, there's no evidence to show that it would stop the coronavirus, which is, I guess, the big thing that's going on right now. And I find that to be very weird because we can go into a restaurant, we have to wear our masks, but then we're allowed to remove them when we eat or drink. And I'm thinking, why not just carry around a drink with you at all times? And you're just like, hey, no, I'm sorry, I'm drinking. If anyone gives you trouble, I'm drinking. And just keep constantly drinking because that's the rule right now. You can take off your mask when you're drinking. So I'm drinking all the time.
Well,
why do we need these rules?
That part doesn't make very much sense, but it does make sense. If both people are wearing masks, I think the odds of transmission are probably pretty slim. But the key is, should that be voluntary or should that be mandatory? Correct. Is the question. Like, I personally will wear a mask if I'm going to be like inside, especially, and then talking to someone, fairly close together. But if I'm like outside exercising or just walking past people randomly on the street, I'm not very worried about it because, it's the fresh air and, the wind's blowing and all that stuff. It's when you have when you're closely speaking to someone, I believe, and people are breathing on each other or whatever, is where there's a chance of transmission. But you have to be practical about that. And what government does is they have this one size fits all, and they're saying that no matter, even if you were alone at your office, you'd have to have the mask on, is what they're probably saying.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense. You have to look at the circumstances. Sometimes you need it, and sometimes you don't. And they don't consider that. And then when they have these shutting down of businesses, that made no sense either. What's essential and what's not essential. Every business is essential to the people who are involved in it. And there was no appeal. There's no due process of law. So I've been opposed to like lockdowns and closing of businesses from the very beginning. Get people information they need to protect themselves, but don't just have the hammer of the law ruin people's jobs and businesses and medical treatment. You couldn't even get medical treatment for a while.
That's
unless
right.
You had a government approved disease.
You know, and you were talking about essential. Who's more essential than teachers? But we can't open the schools yet. Who they're deeming essential is like how they talk about like hate speech sometimes. What's offensive to you may not be offensive to me. Like kind of things like that. Anyways, I digress. But I wanted to ask you a question about the vaccine. Once it's available, should it be mandatory to take?
No, I mean, it's a good idea normally to get a vaccination. I mean, I'm certainly in favor of vaccination and think they work. Well, we don't know if this one will work. I think a lot of people might say, you know what, it's okay to take that, but I'm not going to be the first one. Let's wait till a few million other people take it and see if it doesn't kill them or not before I would take that vaccine. But no, it should never be mandatory, though. I mean, I certainly believe in health freedom. You control what goes into your own body. Nobody else should be doing that for you.
Absolutely.
but you should have as much evidence as possible. There's a lot of people that just seem to be paranoid. They might say, well, if this person says I should take a vaccine, then I'm not going to, because that person is part of some vast conspiracy or something. And that's not a good reason at all. I mean, it's better to look at the science, do your research, and if you believe it's safe for you and that's right for you, then you should take it. If not, not. I mean, it's a personal choice.
Yeah, absolutely. A constitutional lawyer and legal scholar Alan Dershowitz, the OJ lawyer and
Oh
recently
yeah.
Trump's lawyer, he said, quote, "Let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread the disease. Even if you disagree, you have no right not to be vaccinated. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm."
Well, there's so
Unquote.
many problems with that.
Yeah.
There's so many problems with that because he has no idea if you're going around infecting anybody or not. You might not be sick. And the
Yeah.
odds are you probably aren't going around infecting anybody. I mean, they would have to, if they suspected you of that, then they could probably make some kind of investigation and do what used to be done for actual infected people, and that's a quarantine. And then, but now what they did in this country is instead of quarantining known sick people, they quarantined everybody else so they can stay away from the sick people, it seems. And that's totally wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's so crazy, and we were talking about Fauci and how Fauci told us masks, they don't work. It just makes people feel safe in that famous interview. And then later he was asked by,
Mm-hmm.
was it Jim Jordan or Rand Paul? I think it was Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan was saying something to the effect like, "Hey, um, geez, I totally lost my train of thought. Run me back my train of thought there, Brandon."
Jim Jordan, he was talking with Fauci, about the
Fauci,
mask,
that's
making
right.
people
Yeah.
feel comfortable.
Right, and then he goes to the effect like, no, it wasn't even Jim Jordan. It was another senator who said like, "Do you regret telling people not to wear masks?" And he's like, "Okay, let me tell you something." Basically, the guy lied to us. Fauci lied to us intentionally because there was a shortage of masks. And so I think there's this idea where like Fauci, the God Fauci, may peace be upon him, kind of thing going on with Fauci. And he told us masks don't work. They just make people feel safe, which maybe still be the case. But then he was saying, well, listen, blah, blah, blah. We had a shortage and I had to say that kind of thing. And that makes people think, what else are you lying to us about, sir?
Well, right. See, that was the really big mistake of the whole thing, was that lie about the mask at the beginning, or changing his mind about that, or formally or officially changing his mind, because that's what made a lot of people say, like you said, that they're suspicious of the masks, even though logically it would seem like masks should work, especially surgical masks, because the doctors and nurses use them. Why else would they use them if they didn't work, right?
Correct.
So there is a reason to use them, but people are naturally suspicious. And of course, if you force somebody to do something like that, that's when a lot of people just get their hackles up and say, well, you're not going to tell me what to do. And so the fact that they're trying to make this everything mandatory and make people do things they don't want to do, that they're suspicious of, is what's driving a lot of the conflict that we're having right now.
And it's funny, our co-host, he's not here today. He's on a special assignment. He recorded a video. We had a COVID hoaxer / flat earther on the show. And he's like absolutely against like masks and everything. He's like, why do you even like wear a mask? Like stand up for yourself, kind of thing. And I was like, listen, man, I just don't want confrontation. So speaking of confrontation, our co-host here, David, went into like a Best Buy or something without a mask. He was super kind of like, we're going to do this. We're going to walk through it. And somebody from the Best Buy walked up to him and tried to give him a mask, and he blew up on him. I mean, he didn't blow up on him and say like, hey, blah, blah, blah. He's like, why would you just come up to me and like, why wouldn't you just ask me? Why don't you like talk to me? Or why is it like, oh, here, wear this mask, We'll play the clip next week, maybe later on tonight. But I thought it's weird that we're having people like, I'm myself, I just don't want that confrontation. I'm going to wear the mask. I want to be libertarian and I don't want to stand out too much. And I mean, it's got nothing to do with my political views. It's just that, listen, I've seen too many videos of people yelling at people that aren't wearing masks. And there's too many videos of people that are like telling you not to wear masks. I'm just not into any of that. I'm just going to keep going on with going on. And David here, he's eccentric, to say the least. When he was talking about flat Earth, he was like, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So, but sometimes that happens. He's a fun guy. So let me move on. Let me move on here to some more of your platform. LGBT rights here on your website. On your website, it says that you're all for LGBTQ plus rights. While I don't think the government should be involved in marriage, I believe that G's and L's should be able to do it. If we're able to do it, why not, right? So other than the right to marry, what other rights are you going to be fighting for them?
Well, basically, libertarians were in favor of gay rights going back like 50 years, almost. The party's almost 50 years old. And way back in the 70s, when being gay or gay sex and all was even considered mental illness by the American Psychological Association, we were calling for recognition of gay marriage and full rights for gay people to live their lives as they see fit, the same as anybody else should. There shouldn't be any discrimination about who you love based on who you love or what kind of sexual position you like or whatever the case may be. And so we were right at the forefront of that. We had gay candidates, gay party leaders, and a lot of support in the gay community for many, many years. Now less so because the Democrats have certainly picked up on that issue. But with gay marriage, we were there 30 some years before the Democrats were, and they were really late to the game. I mean, Obama and Biden were pretty late to the game. Hillary Clinton was late to the game, and now it seems to be like a part of the party mainstream, but it wasn't just 10 years ago.
Right.
So they just put their finger up to the wind, and decide how much they can get away with on some of these issues. So the problem is, for the gay community, is that we don't want to give any special privileges to the gay community beyond what everybody else has. We want everybody under the law to be treated equally, and gay people should be treated the same as straight people, but they shouldn't be treated extra than straight people, for example, or same as with any other group.
I agree 100%. And I feel like that's what a lot of like Democrats, that's where they start going into, they'll start saying, hey, we're for LGBT rights. And then everyone thinks, oh, the Democrats were the ones of LGBT rights. But then all of a sudden they're for giving them extra treatment, extra stuff. And like, well, wait a minute, I thought we were for equal here, and you're giving them more rights. And so I asked a lot of people, what rights are afforded to straight folk that LGBT folks don't have? Same thing I say with the women's rights as well. What rights do we have that they don't have? And it's all the same. At this point now, we're pretty equal. I think that's why LGBT, or at least gay rights, have sort of gone down the wayside. Now they're working on trans rights, which makes me ask you: should like a trans woman be able to compete in sports with the gender that they identify with?
I have mixed feelings about that. And I mean, that's something that really would have to be decided, like whichever organization is putting on the sporting event would have to decide that sort of thing, with an agreement amongst all those that are participating in that sport. But in theory, it seems like it's unfair. And I know there were some female, or high school female athletes like in the Northeast that were complaining about that, saying, wait a minute, we're the champs. And then these guys come in, or who used to be guys at least, and they have all the muscle tone and all that because men are generally bigger and stronger.
Whoa, take it easy there, buddy. Take it easy with the hate speech.
Well, no, from their body types though, and they're welcome to identify as women if they want to have a conversion that way. That's perfectly fine with me. Whatever they want to do.
Totally fine.
But they have to. They don't want to. There shouldn't be any like quote unquote cheating going on. Like they're only doing it in order to win an athletic contest or something.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that they're cheating. It's just that they unintentionally cheated by growing up as a male and obtaining all the testosterone that a woman never would get. That's the problem here. Men going or trans women going into the UFC and just brutalizing the women that they fight against, those kind of things. The women are all for it. They're like, yes, we're for equality until they get their head bashed in by this guy and their eye socket beat the fuck in. Like, we got to be careful what we say. And I think maybe there is a place for the trans sports. There it is, trans sports, why not? At least they're all on the same playing field. And maybe eventually we get to a point where See, this is the problem with the trans thing, though, because when do you transition into a female? Does it happen when you're a child? Do you get hormone blockers from your parents? Like, this is where it gets concerning for me as a person here. Do we give children that think that they're little boys who think that they're girls hormone blockers to help them feel like a girl?
Right. See, I wonder about that because I just really don't know whether a kid really knows that, or is it some decision that they would need to make when they're older? But yet, when they're older, it might be too late to get the right body type that they're looking for or something because they've already gone through puberty or whatever. So I just don't know what's right on that. That would be for people between. That's another thing between doctors and their patients that perhaps the law should not be involved in.
Well, listen, when I lived in California, to get a medical card, you had to go to a doctor, and the doctor, you fill out an X in a box, and you pretty much get your medicine. So we may see something of that nature if we go that route.
Well, maybe so. But the thing is, though, that it really is kind of a sacred trust between doctors and their patients, and really the government shouldn't interfere in that. It does come up on a lot of issues. It comes up on the abortion issue. It comes up on the end of life, like euthanasia kind of issues, and it comes up here on the trans issue. And there's just so many places where the government says, we're not going to listen to what the doctor and the patient want. We're just going to decide for them. And this is what government does. They just think they know better than what people, better than people want for themselves or what they want. And so it's just not right. I mean, I believe in individual choice. That's what a mantra of libertarians. And government is the opposite. They just want to intervene in all these different relationships.
Absolutely. We only got a few more minutes left with you.
Okay.
I wanted to touch on immigration real quick here. So you're for Dreamers to get immediate citizenship. You're against the wall building and you're for stopping deportations, except for the violent offenders. Now, you've also mentioned something in there. I thought it sounded like you're for open borders. They can move freely between borders and such. Is that something you're for, or just freely moving between borders?
Well, in theory, I mean, I do think that there should be reason to deny someone access, and that would be whether if they're a criminal, if they're a terrorist, and if they have a communicable disease, those would be reasonable. And that's the kind of thing that at Ellis Island back, 100 years ago, that they looked for. They had the immigrants were checked for tuberculosis and other communicable diseases. If they had them, they got sent back. There's been some really interesting, entertaining movies about that subject where a family comes over and one member of the family has tuberculosis and they aren't allowed in with the rest of the family or something. It's kind of heartbreaking. But the theory is you don't want someone who's diseased coming in. And of course, we don't want criminals coming in, but just about everybody else, immigration is a positive good for this country. It always has been. Both of my grandfathers were immigrants.
That's right.
And the prejudice in that regard, I think people think opposite of what the actual facts show. They think, that immigrants are a drain on society, that immigrants take people's jobs. But in general, this just isn't true. It's been shown.
Absolutely not. My mom is an immigrant. I'm a first generation here. And I am for the border wall per se, because who's stopping the people? Because you're like, okay, we got to make sure to check for them, for the lice, for the tuberculosis.
Yeah.
When does that point come? When they're coming here?
The thing is though, it's very hard to come here legally though. Now, if you were like some, say in Mexico, if you were like some wealthy doctor who lived in Mexico and applied through all the legal channels to immigrate, you might get a chance to do that in 20 years. But if you're like some day laborer, there's absolutely just no way legally that you can come to this country in the absence of some sort of.
Then why are there tons of day laborers at Home Depot right now? I mean, I can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and they're standing right there. I mean, where do they come from?
Well, they illegally crossed in some fashion.
Well, I'm from Orange County, California, and that was like. Yeah. Dude, that is everybody there pretty much was.
Right. What you would need to do though is if everybody knew they could come in, but they would have to be sign in. They need to be identified. But if they knew they were getting in, just about everybody, unless they were up to no good, would come through the normal process to do that if they knew they were getting in. But now they know they're not going to get in, especially under the Trump administration. They're going to be separated. Their kids are going to be put in cages and things like that. So trying to do things right,
Look, Ted,
they aren't able to.
this whole nomenclature of saying putting kids in cages is getting old with me. We saw the cages. I mean, personally, I never saw any cages. I see. When I think cages, I think of like my cat's cage, that I'm ready to take them in. But I'm seeing basically fences, in small doses, small rooms that are the walls are made of chains. I don't see them as cages, and most certainly don't think that like they're like stealing the children and putting them in cages. Man, like, that's just it sounds like propaganda when I hear it. Yes, they're being separated, but that was happening in the last administration, which I guess it stopped, and then Trump put it back on because he wanted to, send a message that you bring your kids, you come here, you'll be separated, which I get the deterrent part. It's sort of the same reason why we have prisons here. Hey, you break the laws, you're going to be separated from your children by being put in prison. So I don't, do the people that are coming here illegally, which I don't know how many it is, but do the people that are coming here illegally know that they're doing it illegally? They know that they're breaking a U.S. law when they do that?
I'm not sure about that part of it, but some of them are trying to come as refugees instead and seek asylum, which is a different process than actual immigration. I think that's where
Totally.
this comes in. But frankly, you're right about the separation and the sort of imprisonment of everybody, like children and the parents separately, even under the Obama administration. In fact, Obama was even called to task by the Hispanic community about that. And they sort of don't want to mention that because obviously Trump is far worse even than that, but it did get started back then. And it seems like the immigration authorities are just, on the warpath against immigrants. They go after people that have, been in the country for a long time and but just had some minor conviction like 30 years ago, and to just drag them out and deport them. And there's just all kinds of attacks on every type of immigrant, and even the H-1B visa holders, the professionals who are really needed in the tech industries in this country. They're being denied access. That's being cut back considerably. So it's just really hard for anybody who wants to come here under any type of immigration plan. And I think that's wrong. I mean, immigrants have made this country, and I think we should be welcoming them and making it easier to come here legally. And when they do come legally, then they're identified. We know who they are and all that. And
I think that's definitely important. And my mother, and she's a Republican, obviously, because she's a real immigrant. I'm just kidding, but she mentions how like she's not for the people when it comes to like dreamers. You're for instant citizenship, and maybe they are the exception to this comment. But she said I had to go through a hell of a lot to become a citizen. So my question I want to ask you, and I think it's the last question I can ask you, is how many illegal immigrants are in America, and what do we do with the population that's here, assuming that they're the good ones, not the bad ones? Like, my mother came here legally. She went through the right channels, made a family, blah, blah, blah. What do we do with the people that are here illegally now?
Well, see, a lot of them don't necessarily want to stay here. They would just like to come, and some guys just want to come work on the farms for a few months and then go back to Mexico or their other country. But because it's so hard to go back and forth now, they've had to bring their families over as well because they can't go back and forth. If we had programs where it's easy to come here just to work and go back, I think we'd have a lot fewer immigrants in that category. As it is, if it became easier to go back and forth, I think a lot of the people would do that on a frequent basis. They'd go down to Mexico, they'd come back to the US, back and forth whenever there's work and all that. And I don't think there would be as much of a problem in that regard. But frankly, even if someone came illegally a while back, if they've been living in this country for years and years, they have jobs, they're paying taxes, they should be able to apply for the same citizenship tests and ability to become citizens as anybody else. I mean, I just don't see that there's any illegal people, really. I mean, if people are looking for a better life, I welcome them. And they have to jump through hoops to get here. And It's sad that
That's some
people
more
do.
of those words. There's no illegal people. No one's saying that you're a legal person. You're just a legal immigrant lawfully. I get
Mm,
it though, man. And you know what,
yeah.
Ted? You're a great guy. I really am enjoying the conversation we're having today.
Mm,
And we're going to let you go here in a second. And, you know, I'm not in your district, but if you're on my ballot, I'm definitely voting. I'm definitely going to vote for you. And I urge the voters to consider the same. I don't think we're allowed to, on public access, do call for actions, but you could consider it, my friends out there. And Ted Brown, thank you very much for joining us. Any final words before you go?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And I always like to discuss the issues because it is hard for libertarians to get the word out because we're kind of not as recognized as the Democrats and Republicans.
That's
So
right.
we're out there trying to compete with the big guys who are spending millions of dollars. And wherever I can get out there and promote freedom, there I am. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you very much, Ted. We'll see you next time, bud. And we'll see you. Love you, man.
Great. Thanks a lot. Take
I
care.
like you more than a friend.